and used to live in Texas.
Mr. Weeks, you're not here to give any expert opinion on this case, are you?
No.
Your role today is to give some historical background information.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Weeks, you said that you were living in Texas at one point. When were you living in Texas?
From approximately, I lived there for about 25 years. So that was approximately 1982 until about 2004.
When you were living in Texas, well, let me back up. You had said that you were a licensed therapist. What does that mean?
In Texas, my license is a licensed professional counselor. I'm licensed in Texas now. In Ohio, a licensed professional clinical counselor is somebody who is licensed by the state to provide therapeutic services to people.
When you were living in Texas, did you have the opportunity to work at a place called First Choice?
Yes.
Please tell the jury what First Choice is.
First Choice was located, I don't think they're there anymore, on East Hemphill Street in Fort Worth, Texas, near downtown. There, we provided services to families affected primarily by drug and alcohol abuse. Commonly, dual diagnosis was present, meaning there was both drug use of some sort as well as mental health disorders such as maybe depression. Our program specifically was residential, and families were there, so it was common for the women, I can't remember there ever being any men that were the primary clients there, would be there with their children.
How did you get involved with First Choice?
After a therapist is licensed, or in this case I wasn't yet licensed, they have internships in which they work, and they can add to their classroom knowledge of clinical real-world experience working in a facility like this.
When were you with First Choice?
The early part of 1999, approximately February to August of 1999.
And Mr. Weeks, I want to ask you a little bit about the intake process at First Choice. Do you recall what kind of information was obtained from the clients when they entered First Choice?
I don't have any knowledge of that directly from working there. The work I did was as a therapist, usually working just with the children, well, I guess also with the parents as well. I didn't do intakes. That's typically done by somebody else.
What type of information would be normally taken during the intake process that you would rely upon in order to provide your treatment and develop a treatment plan?
There's a history taken when an intake is completed. We're going to ask for any drug history, difficulty with law, if there's any law involvement, if a person has any previous diagnoses, if they have any other non-mental health issues, such as they have a medical diagnosis. There'll be information taken about their education, their finances. It's really meant to be quite comprehensive. So the intake is meant to gather a lot of that information to bring the clinician up to speed regarding the individual.
Why is that important?
The background information is critical, and that can help to inform the treatment that's needed. For example, I'm at First Choice because we primarily worked with individuals that are struggling with addiction issues. If somebody doesn't have any addiction issues, then they might not be an appropriate referral for our facility.
Ms. Weeks, as a licensed counselor, how do you create a treatment plan for a client?
We identify the primary diagnoses, then work with the client to identify what are the areas in which they want to address. So if they're particularly interested in addressing some issues, then we'll center the treatment plan there. But we may also, at a treatment facility like this, expand out to other areas to help with employment, for example, if they need assistance with finances. Social workers or case managers will work on that, whereas the clinician will primarily work on the mental health issues.
Now, you talked about dual diagnoses. How common is it for one of the clients at First Choice to have a dual diagnosis?
So I don't remember. I worked there, I guess, 26 years or so ago, but it would be shocking if individuals there, our clients at that time, didn't have also a mental health issue in their background. It's ubiquitous.
What about trauma?
Almost always. There's trauma with individuals that have addiction issues, but I don't have a specific recollection of clients I worked with there. I don't have those records anymore.
We talked a little bit about trauma, but can you explain to the jury what the cycle of trauma is?
Yeah, trauma may manifest later on in somebody.
Hang on just a minute. I'm sorry. I'm going to object at this point. We're delving off into what appears to be expert and recommendations and testifying from his professional capacity as to what cycle of trauma and all this other stuff is. Sustained.
Mr. Weeks, let's talk about the facility itself. What was First Choice like? Did they have, you mentioned
It was like maybe
I'm sorry. You mentioned that they had a residential facility. Were patients or clients allowed to bring their children?
they were.
How was that accommodated at the facility?
You know, as I'm thinking back, trying to remember, it seemed like there were small apartments, maybe even rooms. Apartments might be, you know, like small hotel suites, so to speak, that were there, and there would be, maybe we'd have 10 or 20 families there at a time. And then we had the main building in which we did some of the groups and other therapeutic services.
You said that these residents would be allowed to bring their families and their children. Did First Choice also provide services to the children of their residents?
Yes, that's primarily the work that I did.
Why would First Choice provide services to the children?
Services like play therapy, for example, or stress management could help the client, the child, I should say, in this to be more specific, to maybe work through some issues that they encountered with the mother when they weren't in the facility. Being able to work out some of these issues may help them to manage conflict better, to have success in school better, to rebuild the relationship that, if it was damaged, it would help them to have the skills to be able to repair those relationships.
You mentioned play therapy. What is play therapy?
I'll object again. He's again offering testimony from his expertise and training in this particular case. It's not expert information.
Your Honor, we're just trying to get into what he did at this facility. It is not offering an opinion. He is testifying as to what he himself did. So we are not asking him to give any opinions. What we are asking him to do is to testify as to this facility, what they did, and
With Mr. Horner?
we're getting there.
Well, let's get there.
So, explain again, please, what play therapy is.
Play therapy is the use of toys to help a child to express what may be difficult to verbalize. Art therapy is in some ways related to it. I don't have training in that, but we want to creatively provide opportunities for youth to be able to express things even though they may not have a narrative. Yes.
How do you recall them? That's been 26 years. Was there something special about them that made you remember?
No, I recalled the name just vaguely when you first approached me. I think it was you, I'm not, but when I was first approached to provide support here. But then when a picture showed to me, I clearly remembered, yes, that's Melissa and that's Tanner. Well, I didn't recognize Tanner at all. I knew him, maybe he was 6, 8, I'm not sure his age at that time, but I remembered the mother.
Now, what were your initial impressions of them as a family?
Nothing unique. I found their experience, their presentation to be very similar to the other families that were there. Women coming in who had difficulty with drugs, and their family was affected by it.
Now, you said that you had remembered Melissa immediately upon seeing her photo. What was it about her that you remembered?
I just remembered her face. When I saw it, I recognized her. Nothing else really jumps out.
And just to be clear, in order for Melissa to be involved in this program, she would have had to have had a drug problem?
I assume so. We didn't provide any other services. That was the primary function. There was an emphasis in first choice on 12-step work.
When Melissa and Tanner were at first choice, did she seem to be motivated to work through the program and do better?
I can't really recall anything specifically about her motivation level. My primary work was in play therapy with him. I assume, although I don't recall specific sessions, that I would have just minimal contact with her.
Well, Mr. Weeks, let's talk about your work with Tanner. You said that when you looked at the photo, you remembered the mother, but you didn't remember her son, just by looking at the photo. But after reviewing the records and whatnot, were you able to confirm that you did work with Tanner?
I don't have those records anymore, and I'm sure I did. I assume I did, but it's a good question. I can't say for certain that I provided services to them.
Well, you had said earlier that you had provided services to Melissa and her son. When Melissa was there with her son, do you recall Tanner acting out or having any temper tantrums while at the residence?
I don't recall that specifically. It's very common, and I do assume that I did work with them, although I just want to be really upfront. I can't for sure say that I had services with them. I could have just seen them in the facility, but it's not likely. I probably did work with them.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
You passed the witness.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Stanton?
I'm going to make sure this works. Mr. Weeks, can you hear me here?
Yes.
And Mr. Weeks, this place where you worked, It seems to me that you really don't have any real recollection other than remembering Melissa's face about what you did or didn't do with them in this case. Is that correct?
I have, generally, yes, it is. I just have basic memories of the services we provided there, but specifics with this family, no, I don't have specific memories.
Thank you, sir, for what you do and taking care of people at this point in Pasadena.
Ms. Anderson, redirect.
Just one question, Your Honor. Mr. Weeks, in order to be admitted to first choice with her son, would Melissa have had to have a drug issue?
Almost certainly. I didn't do the intake, but it's just not what we do. We treat people specifically with drug problems at that facility.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor,
No further.
may the witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Weeks, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Okay, we'll be in recess while I look at these records.
Oh, no, these are copies. Yes, we have the emergency.
Hey, I needed that bus yesterday. I needed that bus, and you didn't pick it up. Exactly what I carry every day. I'm gonna try to order probably 2 more of them. Yeah. You start greasing my palm a little bit on those knives, and I'll make sure.
All right, outside the presence of the jury, you're going to offer this as bring the witness in first. Yeah,
Do we have a new battery in this? The battery.
Which man?
Triple. No. Okay. All right. I didn't know you.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, raise your right hand. Solemnly swear or affirm testimony given this call to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay. There is a rule of evidence in effect that says you cannot be in court unless you're testifying, and once you have testified, do not discuss your testimony with anybody else. Okay?
And Judge, since this is a civilian witness, we just want to re-urge our request to have her face blurred, and we'll be using her first name.
Guys are all on it, right? Okay,
What's her name?
let's go.
Can we know her name though? Yeah. I know, I gotta, hold on. I'm like, how do you know?
Go, you may sit there.
Yeah,
Me
well,
and you and her can sit down. be seated. We are ready to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, this witness has been previously sworn to testify truthfully.
On the stand.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mary. How are you doing? Mary, we have agreed that we will call you by your first name. Is that okay? Okay. One thing that I am going to ask you to do is when the court reporter is taking the record, she can only take down yeses and nos and words and head nods and mm-hms and uh-uhs. Don't translate to the record. So if we can get a verbal response, okay? Okay. You nervous?
Not too bad.
Not too bad? All right. Mary, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm retired now, but I was a licensed specialist in school psychology. So big, lots of words, but LSSPs in the schools.
How long had you been an LSSP before retiring?
35 years.
Tell me and tell the jury a little bit about your educational background that allowed you to be a LSSP.
Right. Well, I graduated from high school in 74, went to college at Texas State University, which then was Southwest Texas State, so that's changed too. Graduated in 78 with a psychology degree and a guidance counselor minor. And they had just started, I thought I would be a school teacher or a counselor, just because I thought that's kind of all there was. But the school had started a brand new school psychology program that year. And so one of my professors told me about the program, and it sounded very interesting because I was very interested in the learning process in children. So I was able to start my master's in that program, finished it, and it was a 2-year program, but I went summers and a full year. So I graduated from there in 79, and then I got my first job as we were called psychological associates back in that day, that we did the same thing.
And just to be clear, you are not here to offer any expert testimony, are you?
No.
Are you here just to talk about your personal interactions with Tanner Horner?
Yes.
After you graduated, where did you go to work?
Well, I was in Houston the first 5 years of my career. Then I married and moved to Fort Worth. Then I was with ISD for 12 years. Then I went to Azle for 8 years. And I finished in HEB, Hurst Bedford ISD, the last 12 years. So I kind of hopped around a little bit.
Now, during your time at Azle, did you come to know Tanner Horner?
I evaluated Tanner.
And during your time in the school districts at large, did you have to deal with students who had been diagnosed with Asperger's or autism?
A lot in the last 12 years. Now, back in the Azle days or the school district before that, there wasn't a lot of high-functioning autism talked about or really identified at that time. Azle was a smaller school district. I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing.
You're fine, you're fine.
So my memory of testing students on the spectrum, they were typically more severe students, more severe behaviors. Tanner was more unique because he...
Judge, I'll object. If she's here to provide background information, but she's providing based on her expertise in this case as far as evaluation and testing, or just background information on Mr. Horner?
Response?
Your Honor, because of her expertise and in her background, let's try this again. Because of her expertise, we will be asking her about the services that she provided for Mr. Horner.
That's expert testimony based upon her training and experience and offering it as an expert in this case and her opinions as far as evaluating and testing him and anything else. She's not designated as an expert.
I'll let her testify as to what services she provided, but she's not to render an opinion as to anything.
No, Your Honor, is not going to be rendering any opinions. However, what she will be testifying to is what her knowledge was in the service plans and the treatment plans based upon specific diagnoses. And that is not an expert opinion, that is what she has done. It would be no different from a doctor coming in and talking about their service plan.
Still expert testimony, Your Honor.
I'm gonna let her do it, go ahead.
You said that when you first started with the schools, you didn't see a lot of high functioning. What do you mean by high functioning?
Well, high functioning autism, people typically that are on the spectrum and on that end of the spectrum have language. Whether it's functional, how functional it is or not is a big piece of it. They typically look like neurotypical people do, people that don't seem to have disabilities of any type. So you might not notice them or pick them out as looking different.
When you first started back in Azle, did you have much experience with autism?
We were always trained, every year you had to take a certain 20 hours a year at that time for professional development. So we would be trained, but I would not say I had an excessive amount of training in that particular disability. It was more global.
Did you see a lot of autism when you were?
In Azle?
Yes.
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
My apologies. When you were working in the schools, would you review records
Yes.
in order to make a determination on what kind of treatment plan to have for a particular student?
No, that isn't how we developed what we called IEPs, Individualized Educational Plan. We would review records before our assessment, so we had some basic information about a particular student.
Okay, so tell me about that. What type of records and what type of information would you look for to develop an IEP?
Okay, the IEP is kind of at the end, when all the evaluators would come together and they would write their report and put it into a document. Then the ARD committee would get together. The ARD committee is after you do all the school people do their assessments, you come together for this one final meeting and you present the information to the parents and the teachers, and it's called an ARD committee, Annual Review and Dismissal. At that meeting is when you talk about the student's needs for special education. When you are evaluated in the school district, you are evaluated for special education services. So in theory, well, not in theory, factually, anybody who meets eligibility for special education services has a deficit in some area. It could be intellectual deficit, it could be a learning disability, it could be behavior. Did I answer that? So in the ARD meeting, we then talk about the deficits that the student has and what were some of the accommodations and modifications we could provide in the school to help them improve whatever their deficit areas were.
Okay, so when you're dealing with students with autism, what type of deficits would you normally see?
But there are 3 pillars of autism, and
Judge,
the
I will
first,
object to this. This is definitely expert.
Sustain.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, ma'am, sustain.
Mary, when you are looking at a student, would that student often have a diagnosis before they came to you?
many do. Many do. So yes.
And with regards to autism and students in in the Azle ISD. I want to talk a little bit about, behavior. And generally speaking, based on your experience and your observations of these students over the years, how well do students with autism do in a mainstream setting?
I'm not sure I can really answer that, because every person with autism is different.
And would you agree with me that, you said that every person with autism is different, which means that, not all autism is alike?
Exactly.
Would it be uncommon to have different types of symptoms that would play across different people with autism?
I would say there are similar symptoms, but again, the behaviors or the deficit areas are worse in some and better in others. So it depends upon how the autism manifests itself.
Well, let's talk about Tanner and how his autism manifested with him. Did you ever work with Tanner as a student?
You do work with a student when you do an evaluation. You also...
Well, I'll get there in just a second. Okay. You're fine. You're doing well. Which school were you working at the time you met Tanner?
In Azle ISD, we would go to various schools, wherever the assessment need was. So I would go to the elementary school. I don't know if he was in elementary school when I first evaluated him, or if he was in the junior high or even high school. I don't remember that. I'm not sure about the years.
Well, what kinds of evaluations, or let me back up, what kind of services did Azle provide for Tanner?
Now, I was able to review some of the Azle records, so I wouldn't have remembered this. So is that okay then?
Yes.
Okay. So I believe at the time, Tanner was in a classroom called a behavior improvement class. And I think he was in there about half of the day, and then he would go out to other classes, to the general education classes, so that he was getting a full education, because he was bright. And when I say bright, he was able to be in regular classrooms intellectually. And so he would go out, and typically we would identify the strengths of the student and have those students go into those classrooms initially, so they would be successful, so we could build on some successes. So he, as far as I can remember, he had that situation set up, but he also had, and that behavior improvement classroom was to provide a lot of structure for him, was also to provide the behavioral support he needed. So let's say if any student is in a general ed classroom and they start to have behavioral issues, hopefully that behavior improvement class teacher would assist the regular education classroom teacher. He also had, I don't know if he had, I didn't see anywhere in the records, he had speech and language services to address the pragmatic deficits, which tend to go along with, it goes along with students that have language, typically. But I did remember and saw in the records that he received in-home training, which was when a therapist went into his home and she took him out into the community to expose him to different social settings. And she was a speech and language therapist.
So you had mentioned that these services that were provided to Tanner. Let's talk about how the school district would determine that the services were necessary. Was there an evaluation that was performed of Tanner in order to receive services?
Yes, any evaluation for autism includes a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist to look at sensory issues or motor skills even, a psychologist, a school psychologist, and or a licensed specialist in school psychology. There's a difference there. On a master's level, school psychologists are not in the clinical realm at all. So that's why I'm using the LSSP term more so. Okay, you're asking who else would evaluate?
Well, let's go to your evaluation first.
Okay.
So what kinds of evaluations would you give students?
Autism? And we're
Yes.
speaking strictly about,
Yes.
okay. So, Tanner did have records when I became involved. He did have a report, an outside report that had, I believe was his initial evaluation. I'm not 100% sure of that. It may not have been his initial. So I was to perform a 3-year reevaluation, and that's standard. We do 3-year reevaluations for all students that are identified as having need for special education. It's, so in theory, like if a child has a learning disability, they get a 3-year reevaluation because the hope and the goal is that the student's deficit disability would be cut closer to his intellectual ability, so then he wouldn't have the need for special education services. And likewise, a student that might have a behavioral disorder or an emotional disorder, let's say their family provided, a lot of intensive therapy, and the student's emotions got better and they were no longer acting out. Now, autism is a little bit different because it's not really like autism goes away. So you would still have your basic team reevaluate, your speech pathologist, your occupational therapist, and your LSSP.
Okay. So with regards to the evaluations that you gave, what did your evaluation look like?
Okay, wait, don't talk over. We gotta have one at a time, okay? Go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
You're doing fine, Mary. What did your evaluation look like?
Typically, whatever records you have, you would review those first. So he came with a previous evaluation, and he was already in special education services. So we have some records based on the teacher reports, what his behavior had been like, what were continued concerns, and then we always contact a parent to see how things are going. So we look for more background information. We use what's already known, and then we go to the new teachers or present teachers and get information, not just from the one teacher, but from several teachers, so you know how the student is doing in the different environments. Because then, if there was trouble in certain environments, then we would want to look at why was there trouble in certain environments. So you try to get a good sampling, and then it involves observations.
What do you mean by observations? Observing the student?
In the classrooms. So we would actually go into the different classrooms and observe the students, see what their interactions were like, and add that to the report. Then,
And I had one follow-up question with that. Was it just in the classrooms that you did the observations, or did you observe them in any other aspect in the school?
That's a good question. Lunch is often a place where students are observed. Physical education, but it's a classroom, I guess. That's another, and outside recess is a very big one where we like to observe students' interactions.
Why is it important to observe interactions in the lunchroom or at recess?
There's less structure, and the students can really relate in a more normal environment than like a typical peer would do. So you want to just see simple things like do they have good motor skills? Are they running, with a good gait? Are they uncoordinated? Are they standing off by themselves, or are they interacting with anybody? And if they do interact with somebody, what does that look like? Does it look friendly? I mean, you can't hear them. I mean, I'm not like, you're not right on top of them. But you want to get a sense of, is there some sense of cooperation or, I don't want to say friendship, because friendship is different, but some sense of the ability to be with others in a positive way.
Did y'all have do any independent testing or anything like that?
The actual testing, that the speech and language therapist always pulls a student and does an individual. Occupational therapy pulls and does an individual. The school psychologist typically pulls and does an individual. But that looks a little different with a student that has language, because it where you would ask questions and the student would rate how that made him feel, like, oh, it made him a little happy, a little not happy, or very unhappy. And those kinds of things, and we would use things called incomplete sentence stems, where you read the first part of a sentence and then you have them fill it in with their words. So that we could kind of get a sense of kind of what's on the top of their memories or their brain, or how they look at the world and how they're relating to it through their answers.
So, and with regards to the, all of these evaluations, do you ever have any one-on-one with the student and discuss their behavioral issues with them?
Sometimes, you don't always, in my position, sometimes I would, but not always. It depends, again, what you're looking for, what you're trying to elicit or get a clearer understanding of. There are a couple of very standardized assessment tools that we use also for autism. One is called the ADOS. I do not use that with Tanner. I was not trained at the time to use the ADOS.
Did you have any other testing that you did with Tanner?
I did all verbal. It was all of the verbal interview formats, besides the interviewing of teachers, parents, or grandmother. It was the grandmother interview, and doing the observations.
So it sounds like this is a pretty intense evaluation. It's not just, a couple hours here and you're done. Sounds like it takes a long time to actually do a complete evaluation.
It does.
Typically speaking, how long does it take to finish this evaluation?
A really good question, but you really can't answer it. Some that are pretty easy can take, haven't thought of that in a long time. 10 hours versus 30 hours. I mean, it just really varies.
Mary, I want to talk to you now specifically about Tanner. What kind of evaluation were you doing for Tanner?
I was providing a 3-year reevaluation looking specifically at autism.
Are these 3-year reviews different from the initial assessments?
They may be a little less comprehensive.
Would you still have had the one-on-one time with him?
Yes.
Would you still have used the question and answers that you talked about?
Yes.
Would you still have done the student observation?
Yes.
Would you still have spoken with any of the collateral witnesses?
Collateral witnesses, the teachers and the grandparents, yes.
Yes. And I use the term collateral witness, I was exactly, the teachers, family members.
Or even sometimes a vice principal. If the student had a lot of behavior infractions, they would spend a lot of time in the office. I would get that information as well.
You said earlier that you had spoken with his grandmother. What was his grandmother like, if you can recall?
I don't recall meeting her in person. We talked on the phone. I remember she was concerned. Just concerned.
Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Tanner's mother?
I did not.
Were you able to determine at that point if there was any male role model in Tanner's life?
Not that I was aware of.
Now, were you able to determine whether or not Tanner was living in a stable environment?
It seems so.
Now, in preparing for evaluations, you had mentioned that evaluators are able to review records. Mm-hmm. What kind of records do you review? I know that you had mentioned IEPs and ARDs, but what other records would you review?
Well, I know in Tanner's case, I believe his initial evaluation was done by Child Study Center, so that's where I would have started. Okay. And then I would have looked at recent teacher reports and kind of started from there.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Mary, I'm hand you what has been admitted into evidence as defense exhibit number 69. I'm going to ask you a few questions for those, okay?
So, do I look at that?
Oh, I'll direct you to the page when I get
Oh,
there.
okay.
And you're good. What I wanted to ask you was, based upon your evaluation, based upon your observations, based upon your interviews with the family members, speaking with the teachers, speaking with vice principals, and reviewing the records, did what you see in your evaluation, did that corroborate what you found in the records?
Can you say that a different way?
I don't know if I can, but I'm certainly going to try. Basically, what I'm asking is that you read the records, and the records said, showed that there was a diagnosis of autism. Based upon your evaluation, based upon your interview with everybody, did what you see lead you to believe anything else?
No.
Can I get there? Now, Mary, if you would please turn to page 49 of that document. And, Your Honor, for purposes of publication, we have blocked out all the names and any identifying information. The document that Mary is looking at is not redacted.
Understood.
Judge, do you mind, can I borrow the court's copy?
Sure.
Thank you. I just want to follow.
Hang on, let me find it for you.
Right. Mary, I want to direct you again to page 49 of, let's see if I can get this. Oh, that didn't help. Okay. Right. First of all, page 49, please tell the jury what page 49 is.
It's it's the summary page of an evaluation.
What kind of evaluation?
An autism, multidisciplinary autism assessment.
And was this the 3-year review that you had done?
Yes, this is the 3-year review.
You said that it was multidisciplinary. Who did the final evaluation and who signed off on this document?
Back in that day, the speech therapist, occupational therapist, and the school psychologist did their own individual assessments. Sometimes they would all three be present with each other, and sometimes they would not be. But we would always collaborate together and talk about our assessments and the consistency and what was similar or maybe what was different. So this is only signed by me because this particular one was just the assessment that I did. Now in the R paperwork or the IEP, everyone that were evaluators would sign that form.
I want to talk a little bit about the deficits that were noted in your report. You spoke about social deficits and lack of appropriate communication. What do you mean by lack of appropriate communication?
So, I should have been more descriptive at that time. Again, Tanner has language and he's able to communicate. What type of language I was talking about was pragmatic language, or what's called social language. The ability to understand the meaning behind the words you say, and also to put them in, use contextual clues regarding the environment in which it's used in. So, so colloquialisms or sayings that we might say, like it's raining cats and dogs, a person might take it extremely literally and not think about the other meaning that we are attempting to say when we say things like that. And idioms that are higher level forms of language that are more difficult for people with autism.
You had, in your report, you state that Tanner lacks empathy and has little ability to form friendships. What did you mean by that?
Well, based on my memory, he did have difficulty getting along with others. But again, I can't explain why. There are many reasons for behavior. Probably I shouldn't say more than that.
Is that uncommon with someone with autism?
It's not uncommon, and it's, I guess I would say it's common, and it's not so much that all people with autism don't get along with others, because some do. Sometimes it's more limited with others, sometimes it looks a little bit different. It's just, there's a difference.
When we talk about empathy, what does that mean?
Empathy is the ability to feel something else that someone else is going through, to understand it through their eyes.
Is there a difference between empathy and sympathy?
I believe there is a difference, yes. Sympathy is feeling sorry for, or empathy is feeling those feelings within yourself and understanding them on a more comprehensive level.
So when you say that someone lacks empathy, what does that look like?
For in this circumstance, for Tanner and for many students on the spectrum with deficits in this area, it would just mean it was more limited. He or she would not stop to think about how his behavior might be affecting them, or he or she may not stop and understand that the way maybe his look or his lack of a look made a person feel or do something else. Again, that connection between the way we behave or our mannerisms affect others. I don't think I answered it. I'm not really sure. Let's try it again.
I thought that was a perfect answer. All right, so you had noted that Tanner's ability to use language is not impaired, but the affective and relational aspects of his communication is significantly below what one would expect.
I was speaking about the pragmatic deficits, which was the social language. Again, we as human beings, we pick up a lot through intrinsic ways, by observing others or hearing others or watching others. And so pragmatic language is not necessarily taught. It is inferred and it is learned through, if you have an ability to socially relate or socially understand. So that's what I meant by it's more limited.
We talk about poor eye contact. why is that important in a diagnosis or in evaluation?
It's just another behavioral symptom that can tend to be common. It can, the eye contact is typically more limited, or it can be, we often say it's fleeting. Sometimes they have eye contact, sometimes they don't. So it's just a more typical symptom of autism.
You had also noted that Tanner has possibly a sensory issue, especially in the area of his own personal hygiene needs. What did you mean by that?
Well, I do remember that, and this is not uncommon for boys his age at the time, but his grandmother, I think, was concerned about he didn't really want to take showers, or he wasn't maybe using deodorant. I don't remember exactly, but again, that's can happen to many young males that are learning about our body changing. Although, should I say a little more now?
Oh, go ahead.
So he might have had an aversion to water. Many people on the spectrum have sensory issues. They don't like, things can be visually or auditorily difficult for them. The lighting, too much noise, sometimes water, sometimes getting a haircut, sometimes lots of different little things can cause sensory issues. And I don't remember anything besides the personal hygiene.
You note that Tanner is very rigid about change. What did you mean by that?
Again, that's a fairly common symptom. I wish I had put more explanation about that, but transitions, changing from even classroom to classroom, or maybe from doing a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity. In schools that happens a lot because teachers are constantly having to change whatever they're trying to teach at the moment. Many students on the spectrum have almost like a hyper focus for a short time, and if they're not ready to move on, they're not ready to move on. So you may encounter a little resistance in terms of, no, I'm not finished with that, and just not have any cooperation in that sense.
Now, with regard to the sensory issues, is it uncommon for people like Tanner to have sensory overloads?
It's not uncommon.
And did you ever see?
Wait, again, expert testimony continuing.
Well, sensory overload, I sustain the objection.
Did you ever see Tanner have a sensory overload?
I did not.
Now, based upon your evaluation, you had noted that Tanner continues to exhibit a mild form of Asperger's disorder. What do you mean by mild?
Well, first of all, now we don't call it Asperger's. That was changed. It's just part of autism. And now it is categorized by the severity level, 3 levels of severity. And so Tanner's severity would have been 1. Now, at that time, his severity level was like a 1 because he was able to function in a regular education environment with some special education support. So that, and go out and, order a burger possibly, or do what we would expect all of us do. Doesn't look different, he doesn't exhibit the flapping or the staring or any of the more unusual when you move up the levels.
Is a mild form of autism still autism?
It is.
To your knowledge, do the school districts still use the terms mild, moderate, and
No.
what do they use now?
If they address it at all, they talk about the levels, I believe. I've been retired 5 years, but.
And reflecting upon your notes and, in preparation for everything this week, again, did you have a chance to look at all the records?
Yes.
Now, based upon your review of the records, how confident do you feel about the treatment plan that you had recommended for Tanner?
For that time, I think Tanner had a very good treatment plan. That's all my recollection. He was not someone I heard of a lot, or maybe not often at all. In a smaller district like that, being in my position, I would hear of students that were struggling more. So, not that doesn't mean he didn't struggle, but he was in an environment where you would expect there would be some struggling, and it was to be dealt with on that level.
So your recommendations in this case were, it's recommended that Tanner continue with his current programming and instructional arrangements since it appears to be meeting his needs.
Right.
Do you know if that continued?
I can't say for a fact that it did. I don't know what happened in high school.
And you also had noted that you felt that Tanner would benefit from ongoing training of adaptive social skills and problem-solving strategies for peer interactions. Why did you make that recommendation?
Because he had a lot of difficulty getting along with other students, other peers. He was better with adults, although there was some argumentativeness. But again, that was more in the classroom when he was dealing with probably doing things he didn't really want to do.
Did you ever see him get aggressive?
I did not ever see that, no.
Was it ever noted in any of the documents that you reviewed from the school district that he ever became aggressive?
Well, I did notice that one of his goals was to decrease temper tantrums. Trying to think. There might have been something said about decreased aggression, but it wasn't clearly defined what that looked like.
You had mentioned overload, and you just mentioned tantrums. Based upon your observations, can those look the same?
Overload and tantrums look the same?
Can one lead to the other?
Possible. I'm not sure I think probably every person with autism handles it in their own unique ways.
Again, one size doesn't fit all with autism,
One
does
size
it?
does not fit all.
One of the things that was also recommended was psychological assessment, looking at the emotional deficits. Why would you recommend a psychological assessment?
Good question. I wondered that too, but then I remembered that I probably wanted more information about him emotionally. I knew there were struggles emotionally, but I didn't really understand the why.
Do you recall why you would have recommended that he be under the care of a psychiatrist?
Well, for medication management, because that typically, you can get it from a regular medical doctor, but many medical doctors are not comfortable prescribing medications for children and or to students on the autism spectrum. So that's why I felt like a psychiatrist would have been a better caregiver.
Now, Mary, I want to turn your attention to Azle ISD specifically. At the time when you were there, did Azle ISD have a lot of students diagnosed with Asperger's or autism?
I would say not a lot.
So what does that tell you about Tanner's symptoms if Azle ISD had noted the autism diagnosis in the records?
Judge, I'll take, that's a call for an expert opinion from her.
Sustained.
As a person working in the school, when you see an autism diagnosis, what does that mean to you?
Judge, I'll still object. That's gonna call for her expertise to be able to define what that is.
I'll let her answer that question.
Okay, repeat the question, please.
Working in the school, knowing that Azle ISD did not have a lot of students who were diagnosed with Asperger's or autism, what did it mean to you when you saw that diagnosis in the records that you were reviewing?
I don't know what it meant to me. It just meant that we had a student that had significant deficits in several areas.
Did Azle ISD have specific special education classes?
Yes, that would be, well, yes.
And were there any special education accommodations that Tanner received while in Azle?
I'm sure there were, but I don't have that in the records and I don't remember it.
Now, you had mentioned something earlier about in-home training.
Right,
To your recollection, did Tanner receive in-home training?
he did.
You also had mentioned, and I think I have this right, the behavioral classroom?
Behavior, we call it then, we call something different. Behavior improvement class.
Is that what they refer to as BIC?
Yes.
Okay. What is BIC?
Well,
What does that look like?
oh, sorry, let me see. It is a more restricted environment for a student. Special education provides a range of services. We start with the least restricted environment. So a student, say, that has a learning disability, they only need assistance in the area of learning. So they may go to what it was called, it may be different now, the resource room teacher. And she would provide additional, help. So then the continuum of services increased all the way up to a self-contained classroom, which is where a student would stay in that classroom all the time. Now, the behavior improvement class was originally a self-contained classroom, but the goal was always to get students to be mainstream, to go out to other course classes so that eventually they would all be in general education. If their program was successful, they would all be in the general education classrooms.
So how does a student who was in BIC transition to a general education classroom?
By appropriate behaviors and based on their IEP goals.
So if the IEP goals are met and the behavioral modifications have been successful, then a student can go from that self-contained classroom back to a general?
Eventually. It's not a quick system, but yes, usually one class at a time. See, is there success? There is. Second class is out. Success, yes, there's enough success. And so on.
I believe you just used the expression class out. What is class out?
It would be a general education class.
Did, to your recollection, did Tanner receive an escort to and from classes? Or to and from the bus?
I don't remember that.
Would you consider the big classes? Was it me this time?
It was the defense, it's the state's turn this turn. So.
Your Honor.
These big classes, would you consider them to be a structured environment?
Period.
Why do you say that?
Well, it was a much smaller student-teacher ratio, maybe, let's just say 10 students versus 20 or so in a general education classroom. This is many years ago, of course. Now we have many more students in classes, typically. Sorry, I keep saying that. So each student has their own IEP, so that teacher has to be very structured as to make sure that each of their students is getting the type of accommodations and recommendations that he or she needed to provide for each of those students, and they would be it'd be pretty timely also, and there should have been positive reinforcement for appropriate behaviors, and usually a loss of points or loss of privileges if there was a significant negative behavior.
Now, based on your observations at the BIC classrooms, did the students with autism tend to do better with the structured environment?
I can't answer that because I don't remember, but again, there wasn't a lot of students identified with high-functioning autism that I remember.
Do you recall if Tanner did better in that structured environment?
Well, just based on what the records say, and then that 3-year reevaluation, it seemed to be providing him some positive regard in school.
1 moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Further, Your Honor.
Y'all need a break? Okay. 2:45, 15 minutes. Everyone may be seated. We are ready to proceed, Mr. Stanton, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I want to thank you for being here today and talking with us about some of this, okay? I'm going to try to keep it pretty brief here. Let me ask you, your extent of your contact with the defendant, Mr. Horner here, is that just to do the evaluation, or did you have other contact with him during that time?
Typically, a school psychologist would just go in for an evaluation. Well, I shouldn't say typically. Every district is different. In this circumstance, I would go in for the evaluation, do all the pieces, write up the report, go to the ARD meeting, and that would be the end of it. Unless there was more reasons brought to my attention that I needed to be involved. And that did not happen in Tanner's case.
So you saw him essentially just the one time?
Little snapshot. When you say one time, I mean, I did the observations. I mean, it was within a small time frame compared to, a whole school year or anything like that.
Yes, ma'am. Let me clarify with that. You saw him which you needed to see him to do this 3-year reevaluation.
Exactly.
That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that had several parts, and we've talked about that.
Right.
And you said that after that, you did all the report, and we've looked at this up here. So as a result of that, the first thing on here is it says he has a mild form of Asperger's disorder, okay? And you said even under current standards, that would be like you say level 1? Is that what you said?
I believe it would be level 1.
So still mild.
Compared to the continuum, yes.
Right, okay. And we understand it's a spectrum, but on the far end of one end of the spectrum, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so in the school, we talked about a lot of these records. Now, truthfully, ma'am, you didn't actually write up all these records,
Absolutely.
right?
No.
Okay. And you looked at these, but these are not actually your specific records.
That's true.
But you felt comfortable enough to be here to talk about some of the things that went on with the school and with Tanner based upon your interaction with him. Is that right?
In my recollection.
And so in this case here, and even though you just had that, and had that interaction with him, your words to earlier were that he was bright. Now, I think that's what you said, right?
I tried to change it a bit. Bright enough to function in a general education classroom.
Okay.
I don't remember what his IQ was and any of that. It was sufficient, so I misused the word bright.
Okay. And that's fine, but your definition was, when you used that term, was that he was able to be in a normal classroom.
A general education classroom.
Okay, I'm gonna try to use the terms, okay? So he was able to be in a general education class?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I said normal.
That's fine, I understand.
And so as part of that, you said he still needed some support from the school, correct? And that, to your recollection, he got that support from the school?
Once he was in special education, yes.
Right. And then up and through when you did your 3-year review, he maintained that?
As far as I remember, yes.
But still in a general education classroom?
I don't remember that part. I don't know how much special education he was still involved in. It could have continued all the way through high school. I don't have any memory of that, or that wasn't addressed in any of the records.
Okay.
That, at least that I saw.
But based on what you're saying here, it wouldn't surprise you if he graduated high school normally?
Well, no, it wouldn't surprise me when you say normally. You can still graduate from high school and you have a lot of special education support. But I don't know what that looked like. You're right. Yes.
Now, during this time, it's my understanding that you had some contact with his grandmother. Is that right?
That's right.
And at that point in time, was that your point of contact for him?
With the family. It was. I understood. You want me to?
No, go ahead.
That his mother was in and out of his life, and that did cause him a lot of. The grandmother felt like that was a big trigger for his emotions.
Right. And so, as a result of this and what you did not get re-involved with Tanner Horner at any time after you did this.
No.
And I think you said that he was, and I'm gonna use one of my terms here, is he really wasn't on your radar in the school.
But that's true.
Okay, because you said there were some kids that you would, I think you said you would hear about.
Right. In the office, when other evaluators or other special education personnel would say, oh, you need to check on so-and-so, or this teacher might need you to talk with them, it would be that kind of a thing.
Right. And he wasn't on that.
Not that I recall.
And so we worked through this. You talked about some of the records here. Do you remember in here, you said he was getting behavior improvement?
The class?
Yes, he was getting some form of behavior improvement training.
They were supposed to be providing social skills supports and training in the behavior improvement classroom. That's part of the program.
Okay. And to your knowledge, based on this, was he receiving those services?
Based on the program's standards, that's what should have been happening.
All right. And then you also said he had additional services outside the home.
The in-home training.
In addition to whatever he got in school.
Correct.
And I think you said you didn't remember the details of it, you just remember that he got it.
And that I saw the summaries that the provider had written up about how some of the sessions had gone.
Okay. All right. And so, all right. Got a lot of information. Forgive me here. And when you looked at these records, did you note in here that some of the training and information and things he was getting were providing positive improvement for him with regard to his behavior?
I don't know that, that's a hard question. I'm assuming it provided some positive direction for him, but it's not a quick fix, any of these deficit areas. So we take a lot of training and repetition. So I'm sorry, I don't quite, maybe restate the question.
Okay.
Possibly.
Well, in some of these records, do you note that whatever training he is getting in his classroom is having positive results?
I don't remember seeing anything specifically from the classroom. The notes I remember seeing was from the in-home training. Now,
Okay.
maybe I didn't, I don't know,
Okay.
miss those
Well, let's just
notes.
talk about that then. So in
Okay.
the in-home training that he was getting, did you note in there that it was having a positive effect on him getting the in-home training?
There were times that he had a positive interaction with the in-home trainer when they would go out to the community. There were a couple of times, though, where he had some struggles, such as, I believe there was one time when a friend was over or around, and they were doing a game, and Tanner's mindset was that the game should be played a certain way, and that wasn't what was happening. So there was frustration level there, and that was one of the skills she was working with.
Right, and a lot of the stuff you're seeing here in some of the behavioral issues, they don't all have to be tied to autism, do they?
Think about that a second. I would say that with things like turn taking and learning to share and learning to cooperate with another, those are skills that are typically, we try to teach our preschoolers that. So essentially by elementary school, we should have a pretty good repertoire of what that looks like, and then you begin to make friendships. I believe that Tanner was late in developing those abilities. I don't want to say skills because I don't know how far he really got developing the skills based on what services were provided. Because also, may I add one more thing?
Go ahead.
It's not just the school's responsibility to provide a lot of support for students with autism. The home environment is a big factor as well.
Well, and you said that his grandmother was active and communicating with you, correct?
Again, for my evaluation, not it wasn't a regular phone call here and there.
Well, in all these records, you don't have anything to indicate that she wasn't.
Correct, right.
Last thing I'm going to talk to you is you talked a little bit about lack of empathy, right?
Yes.
And lack of empathy doesn't always exist in individuals with autism, does it?
It looks different. They do. Many people with autism have empathy, but it may look different. So it's not really an all or nothing. It's more of a some do, some don't.
But there's other things that could cause that. Personality disorders, oppositional defiant disorder. There's other things that would cause some form of lack of empathy, right?
Well, I didn't have knowledge that those were factors that I would need to consider or look at the time.
Okay, but you'll agree with me, there's other conditions besides autism that could cause that.
Can cause trouble with
Lack of empathy,
lack of
if it
empathy.
exists.
I agree.
So what it, and I just want to summarize here, what it seems like here is that at Azle ISD, they were providing him the services to the best of your recollection through the time that you quit seeing him, that he needed at that time, based on your recommendation.
Not based on my recommendation, based on that's the law, and they, for him to continue to receive those services, he had to have a need. So there was obviously still a need, so he was still receiving services to some degree. What degree that was, I can't talk about that because I don't know.
But at this point in time, he had you doing an evaluation in your capacity. He had a speech therapist
Should have,
working with him.
yeah,
He had a special classroom working to help him.
yes,
He had in-home stuff also working to help him.
right.
And I think you said there was another possible professional in there besides the ones I listed?
Well, I mentioned an occupational therapist, but I don't, there's nothing about that in the records, but that's one of the standard assessments typically.
Just, it sounds like to me that he had a whole team working for him in school. Is that right?
I believe he did.
That's witness, Sean.
Redirect, and you may redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mary, I just wanted to clarify a few things. When you talk about the evaluation that a school district does for a student, is that a 20-minute check the box and go, or is it an extensive evaluation?
Well, every evaluation is different depending upon what you need to provide the data necessary to meet the criterion for the disorder or the disability. So, some are quicker than others. Autism is not typically a quick, easy evaluation.
Well, when you do an evaluation for autism, what is it that you're looking for?
You're looking for deficits in 3 areas.
And what are those 3 areas?
First areas,
Judge, I'll object. She's again providing expert testimony. She's not been designated as an expert to provide that testimony.
All right, objection's overruled, you may have a running objection. Go ahead.
You talked about the 3 areas.
I
What
can
were those
answer.
areas?
language, social relating, and emotional responses, and then sensory and specialized interests.
What is it about those specific areas that, why is it important to look for deficits in those areas?
Well, those are the pillar markers of autism, so you would expect to find deficits in all 3 areas to some degree.
And if there are no deficits in all 3 of those areas, would that result still in a finding of autism?
Not necessarily.
So in order to have that diagnosis, would you have to have deficits in those areas?
Yes, you should have deficits in all 3 areas.
And even if the diagnosis is considered mild, does that still mean there are deficits there?
That still means there are deficits.
When we talk about students with autism, what type of symptoms would you expect to see in those students?
Well, again, it's a very wide range depending upon the severity, their intellectual level, how many impairments they have in each of the areas. Having language is a positive thing, but it's more limited. So you might not see as much with that in the language area to the untrained eye, and even the trained eye may have to provide special assessment tools to really get an assessment of how big the deficit is. And that's why I talk about pragmatic language. Speech therapists work very hard at providing a lot of information for assessments, and I wish we had one of those. I'd be curious myself about that. The social relating piece and emotional response was obviously a big one for Tanner, because I think that behavior disruption was probably one of the reasons he was initially evaluated back at his very first evaluation. And I don't think he was initially identified until he was about 9. So something was showing up in him that they weren't sure what was going on, and they had this evaluation, and he met all 3 of the pillars. even the sensory or the special interests. I don't know, I don't remember what his special interests were, if he had any. So he did meet that eligibility. So there was something going on that was significant enough that he did meet that criteria, and not until he was 9. But that is not that unusual for people's language. They can, their behaviors can be misunderstood, and it can look like oppositional defiance, but maybe there's something driving that behavior.
Well, let's talk about oppositional defiance. During your evaluation of Tanner, did you diagnose him with oppositional defiance disorder?
No.
Did you diagnose him with any personality disorder?
No, but I was not, that was not my task. My task was to look at a 3-year reevaluation specifically for autism.
If you had seen anything that could lead to a diagnosis of ODD or personality disorder, is that something that you would have noted?
Yes, if I saw anything that led me to believe it wasn't autism, but also some of those conditions are not easily identified until a student or a person is a little bit older in life. Oppositional defiant disorder, they're usually consistently oppositional and defiant, not just in this environment and not in that environment. It's a pretty global behavior.
So if someone has oppositional defiance disorder, you would tend to see it would be a common occurrence.
It would be very common, I believe. I'm not an expert in that disorder.
Okay. Then I won't ask you any other questions on ODD.
Okay.
But you had talked previously about sensory overloads.
Yeah.
Explain to the jury what a sensory overload is.
Well, again, sadly, we don't really have any, at least documentation, or I don't have a memory of what Tanner had sensory-wise, but I know in general there are many sensory indicators that students struggle with, and it can be, the visual, the lights, the hum of the speakers. It could be just too much action going on in the classroom, which is very common. It could be, that's why we also do a lot of observation in the PE, physical education, and in the lunchroom, because there's a lot going on in those environments, and students can get very agitated in those environments if they have deficits in the sensory area, if they get overloaded with that kind of, with those issues.
Well, with regards to noise overload, is it uncommon in your experience to have people who are autistic like music?
Oh, no, it's not uncommon.
And music can get loud. So how would you be able to reconcile playing, loud raucous music and versus having a sensory overload due to noise? Well,
again, I'm not an audiologist, but I believe it makes sense that it gets into a different part of the brain. If there's an interest an autistic person has in a particular thing, could be music, they might get even, they might need more input from that particular, whatever, like I'm trying to think of, OTs would say that some students need extra pressure because they just lack that, they need that. So it could be that a person that is super interested, had a high interest in music, could listen to it in a loud volume, but yet they, in a classroom of, tapping and pencils moving or people clearing their throat and the lights and the hums, it's a different sensory load. It addresses a different part of the brain.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. State.
And we talked just a little bit about sensory overload here. You're not saying that you didn't test Tanner for that. You don't know anything about if he's affected by that.
Right, and that's typically the occupational therapist who looks at sensory issues.
And that, you said, it could be things you said within a classroom and things of that nature.
Could be in a classroom, could be in the lunchroom, PE room, and the art room. It could be at many places.
And you said that's a sensory problem, right?
It could be.
And you said everything from tapping to noise, maybe someone screaming.
Well, someone screaming, you would think would be a little,
You would think would create some form of sensory issue.
I don't know that I can answer that. I was thinking, focusing on educationally, what would be some sensory issues that would impair him.
And the last thing I'm going to ask you about, in the first couple of pages, you've got your records there in front of you, right?
Yes.
And even as, I'm going to turn you to page, I think it's the fourth page in here. Back in 2002, there's a note even as far back as 2002 where it says behavior reported by parents. You see that on there?
Page 4,
Yeah, the fourth page, and I think what you have.
it's a checklist.
Yeah, it looks like this. 10-2-02, behavior assessment intervention plan.
Oh, yes, I see it.
And it says here, behaviors back in 2002 reported by parents, quick to anger, is that right?
Yes.
And then also reported by school staff, quick
Quick
to anger.
Yeah, I see that.
And then as we flip through these pages, you'll agree with me after your review, there's several indications where that Tanner has indicated even as far back as 2002 that he's got anger issues.
Correct.
That's what Ms. Shaw.
Ms. Anderson?
Is it uncommon for people with autism to be quick to anger?
Again, every person with autism is different, but I would say it's not uncommon.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. State?
Nothing further on.
May this witness be excused?
It's fine
No
with the state.
objections.
Thanks, ma'am. Leave those there.
Just leave
Leave
it.
those.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna do some things with the lawyers that involve the rest of the afternoon, so I'm gonna send you home, okay? We'll see you in the morning, 9 o'clock, okay? Yeah, we're done. Okay. We're done, everybody, thank you.
And Judge, we do need to put something on the
Oh,
agenda.
go ahead.
We just wanted to note for the record that for the last several days, I believe beginning this week, there have been protesters outside the courtroom, or outside, I'm sorry, the courthouse, holding signs that say execute Tanner Horner. And jurors are coming in. We don't know if they've been exposed to this. There have been posts all over Facebook with pictures of this person. I know people are not supposed to be looking at the news, but I don't know what can be done. I think we need additional admonitions to the jurors about social media and things of that nature, because it has been posted and reposted. I have noticed that Facebook has been taking some of it